We're here at the 21st Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections at the CROI, as we call it, in Boston, Massachusetts, with the Young Investigator panel and Ben Young, who has agreed to be partners with me on this panel to ask a few questions of some of our leading enlightened young investigators who made it to the CROI and did presentations. And so before we get started, I just wanted to say that Hiroyo has to leave a little early, so we'll allow her the exit when the time comes. And meantime, why don't we start with you and kind of go over the background of the work that you're doing and who you are and what got you into the field.
Okay, I'm Hiroyo Hitano. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at UCSF, and I started working in the field of HIV in 1999 when I was still a medical student. I took a year off to do a program at the NIH with Cliff Lane's clinical group, and it was really sort of the start of my career at that point. And more recently, I've been working on studies related to HIV persistence and testing cure strategies.
And you were on a panel, as you said earlier, with the elite controller.
I was. I think that was a couple of years ago.
I can't remember when it was. We did a few of those.
It was memorable.
That's kind of like we're trying to figure out what to do now because people are being treated early, and we have the PrEP and everything else, and we can't identify maybe the elite controllers anymore. It's going to be difficult.
And one may argue that it may not be necessarily important to distinguish them. So we just completed a study showing that even in elite controllers, they have higher levels of immune activation and
still that
cardiovascular disease markers. And if you actually treat elite controllers, those markers go down and improve. So it may be less critical to distinguish them.
Because there was a number of pieces to that: the slow progressors, slow non-progressors, and so forth. So, okay, so we will talk to Natanya. Natanya.
Yes.
I'm getting it wrong here a little bit.
That's okay.
But what can you give us the background on how you got into the field?
Sure. So I became interested in infectious diseases when I spent a year at the NIH in medical school as well. And back then I was not working in an HIV lab, but as I went back to medical school and in residency, I was particularly touched by a lot of the problems that the people that I saw that had HIV infection, had end-stage AIDS, were dealing with. And then as time progressed, I ended up deciding to go into infectious diseases. And once I was at the NIH for fellowship, I started working with some investigators, and I found my way into Danny Duick's lab there. And he focuses on, one of his areas of focus is immune activation, HIV infection, and I've really taken that on and trying to figure out what aspects of immune activation are beneficial and what aspects are detrimental. And it looks like with treatment, a lot, with successful treatment and viral suppression, inflammation may actually be worse for a lot of people and may be a driver of end organ disease.
And Danny Duick is very famous. I should say he stands out. and he definitely, I watched one of his presentations, and one of the conveners said, it really is true. Science can be fun.
Yes.
He makes it, where it's actually very exciting, and I wish that I had the capability to do that, but I don't know enough about science. That's my problem. But you're in a great place to learn from somebody like that. Maybe talk a little bit about, or is he your mentor, or is there?
He is my mentor.
Yeah.
I've actually moved on to the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston recently, but we continue to work together, and we still have a lot of active projects together.
He must be that must be a great experience working with him.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic training.
And Kara?
It's nice to meet you.
Give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Well, I was initially interested in doing work in health outcomes with underserved populations, and as a medical student, a mentor actually led me to hepatitis C work with investigators at the Rhode Island prisons when I was at Brown, and ended up doing some a small clinical project looking at treatment outcomes with interferon and ribavirin in male prisoners there. And then as a resident at UCSF, was heavily exposed to HIV, and then HIV and Hep C co-infected persons. And so that really led me to looking more at complications of hepatitis C in HIV infected persons. And now at UCLA, I'm an assistant professor there, and I work with Judy Currier. I've sort of melded her interests in cardiovascular complications with mine in HIV and Hep C.
Another good, really good. So she is your mentor?
She is my mentor, yeah.
Fabulous person.
Yeah.
Really. So you all are, and who is your mentor?
Do
you still have one?
I do. I don't think they ever go away, fortunately.
Yeah.
I think I've been incredibly fortunate in having a long line of mentors who continue to mentor me and have become friends. Cliff was an early one, Rick Davey, Mike Polis at the NIH, and then I did my residency in Boston, and Dan Koritsky's was a wonderful mentor there. And then most recently, although it's been many, many years at this point, I've been working with Steve Deeks, and he's really just a phenomenal mentor in every sense of that word.
Classic great
mentor. I agree.
So I know that I want to allow you to ask a few questions too, Ben, because it's always great for me to ask questions. But here's a the other question maybe I had in my mind was, okay, at what point do you become a mentor? Because you're already grasping a lot of that great experience from mentoree. So you want to do some mentoring, right? How does that work?
I think that's very organic. We're all in academic centers where you're constantly interacting with medical students and residents and fellows, and so it's a natural progression, I think. And I certainly have started to work with fellows in the last few years, and it's great. It's really nice to put your touch on what you've learned and try and pass that forward.
Trying to figure out how you would do without. It seems like almost like a support group of kind, isn't it? Buddy program, or in a way.
I think it's nearly impossible to make it in academics without a strong mentor. Yeah.
Because you have to have that guidance of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And especially in today's world. I mean, you all are very talented, but there's some people maybe aren't quite so talented, and they have a bit more of a struggle getting the grants, the funding, and then having funding cut, which we've probably, many of you, maybe some people have experienced.
I think we all experience.
It's or parts of your funding cut or something like that, making hard decisions. Yeah. So, do you have any ideas?
Yeah. Well, actually, CROI, I'm actually very pleased that you mentioned one of my mentors was Dan Koritsky, because I spent several years in his lab in Colorado before he left to Boston, and Steve Deeks remains one of my closeted heroes of the ability to do very precise and really innovative science on a very small number of people, rather than looking to answers that require, and sometimes impossibly, a 5,000 patient study. He's able to glean very fundamentally important insights from looking at 50 or 20.
Or less.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think that's wonderful. I actually just wanted to applaud all of you for being in the field that I think Fred and I have been at for a while. I'd like to think that it was quite a few years ago, I was in your shoes as an early career investigator, and it's so critical, not just for HIV, but for the advancement of biomedical sciences around the world, that your voices are heard and your careers are nurtured. And I'll add one thing, that my other mentor is a guy named Tom Check, who I did my doctorate work with, and I think I said this to Kara and Natanya earlier, which is to allow your careers to have the maximum degrees of freedom to take, sort of to use a chemistry metaphor, to find innovative solutions to the very serious problems that we face. So maybe just to since I know Hiroyu needs to leave shortly, is kind of the typical question. Where do you see your field, or where do you see what your investigations are currently? Where do you see them in 5 years? And what does that mean to me now working in public policy, trying to advocate for universal access to treatment in prisons in Ukraine or in sub-Saharan Africa?
I think one of the unique things about HIV care, HIV research, and one of the things that drew me to it is that we can't predict where it's going to be. And it's incredibly fast moving. It's one of the diseases in medicine where you can't pick up a textbook that's been published. I don't know if people even still have books, but if you were to, because it's out of date. And so I don't know that I can pretend to predict where we're going to be. I think the last 3, 4, 5 years have been incredibly exciting in terms of cure research and just the energy that's there amongst the community and as well as researchers is I think unparalleled in terms of the possibility of a cure. So I'm hoping that in 5 years we'll be even closer to that in a way that is applicable to more than a few patients in unique circumstances. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, Hiroyo, you have to leave.
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry.
Take your microphone off.
Okay.
And we appreciate you being
Thank
here
you.
so much.
Thanks for the invitation.
And definitely we'll visit with you again, I'm
Okay.
sure. Under circumstances, maybe the cure. Who knows?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we're back to you folks. And I think it's important for us to learn what we can for the people who are watching this program that may be thinking, would I want to get into the field of HIV? And why would I want to do that? And I think for me, it's always been that it's the most challenging field in the world that you could possibly get into. And if you're smart, you want something that's going to challenge you, right? What's your take on it? What's your feeling about why you would want to get into this field? Because you've kind of touched on it a little bit.
I think a lot of, hopefully, as Hooray, you mentioned, there's been a lot of talk about the cure. Hopefully that's in the near future. Mm-hmm. But I don't think even when we achieve a cure that's going to be necessarily the end of HIV, particularly for the currently infected people who've dealt with this chronic infection for a long time. And I think there's still there are going to be residual effects of the infection even after it's cured that will need addressing.
Even if there was a therapeutic cure, we
Right.
still have the damage that's been done to the body.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that provides not only, there's not only a need there, but it's also an opportunity to perhaps discover therapeutic interventions that could help even more people than the people who have, dealt with HIV for a number of years. Mm-hmm. We know cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, and fatty liver disease, essentially renal disease. All of these are areas that are diseases that affect not only people with HIV but also without HIV. And I think that HIV-infected people, even after they're cured, provide a unique opportunity for us to learn a lot about immunology and really help even more than the HIV-infected population.
Well, in parallel, my work is in HIV and hepatitis C co-infection, and I've had people ask me before, well, why do you want to study Hep C when that's a disease that's going to go away? And I certainly don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, especially if we can't disseminate opportunities for diagnosis and treatment very effectively. Mm-hmm. And I think that's some ways away. But we are getting to this place of answering more subtle questions, I think, of how do we improve long-term health outcomes, and not just related to the infection itself, but to its associated inflammation and comorbidities and co-infections. Mm-hmm. I think that for me is the ultimate goal, is how do we help people, especially as they are aging with HIV and doing overall well, how do we help them live better, live longer, live healthier?
Yeah, so you two are bright, young professors. What do you tell the medical student who's not yet differentiated into infectious diseases, not yet differentiated in immunology and so on? Why should they do what we do?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily tell them that they should do what we do. I would tell them essentially what I love about what I do, and namely that I'm in the clinic, I see patients, I run a lab, I have an opportunity to really be inspired by my patients, and then go to the lab, develop assays, and kind of go back and forth between the bench and the bedside, and really feel like I have I have the capabilities to improve people's lives on multiple levels. And I think that people should go into something that they feel passionate about, and hopefully that is our field. I think it's a great opportunity for learning and for caring for people and for being among some very inspirational investigators as well. But yeah, I would encourage people to follow what they love, and that success will come from that.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you just said, Natanya. I think it is important to find a passion and to think about what the questions are you want to answer, and then also to think about who you want your community to be. And for me, going into infectious diseases and HIV and Hep C, I was really excited. I knew who I wanted my peers to be because I was so inspired by my mentors, and I was really led by the people, I think, and because you can do research in any field from any source of clinical training, but I really wanted to be part of the ID community.
How do you feel about the experience here at CROI? Have you been to a lot of CROIs and so far?
This is my fourth CROI,
Okay.
and I find it to be the most inspiring conference. And it's a great place to meet other investigators and to network. That's something that I was not familiar with doing, and I'm still quite early on in my career. This is my first year on faculty at UCLA, and I love the exchange of ideas and just to hear what everyone is doing, and I really mostly find it really inspiring.
So you're basically talking. Do you find it hard to go up and talk to somebody that you saw a presentation and saying,
I do.
what
That's
about
very
this?
intimidating.
What about this?
Yes, and but I think when you're passionate about what you're working on, you have to do it, and it's easier to do because you want to do it. You want to talk about it. And so much of research, I think, is about collaborating outside your institution, and finding the experts that where we're all together. You can really create the best approach, the best study, and have different expertise sort of coming together. And so it's really important.
And the place to do that, really, the best place to do it, the easiest place to do it is at the posters.
That's true. Yes, you can have easier
You got
access.
that easier access,
Yeah.
one-on-one.
Right.
In many cases, you don't have, and you have some colleagues that are standing around and also
Right.
listening to what you say.
And mentors are really important here too, in terms of connecting you when you're, when you're shy or so new to the field. Judy Courier has helped me a lot in terms of helping me to make those connections and introduce me to the people that I should know. Yeah. And hopefully it becomes mutually beneficial. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is my 5th CROI, I want to say, and I've spent some time doing basic science research. I've gone to basic science conferences, and I've always felt a little bit, like I wasn't quite in my element. And I'll never forget my first CROI, and I was surrounded by so many MDs and PhDs who were doing translational research that was really oriented towards improving patients' lives through basic science. And I was just, I was like, wow, this is where I belong. And I would like to second also what Kara was saying. I can be a bit shy when it comes to approaching someone who's just given a speech in front of an elegant speech in front of 4,000 people. But I think, having my mentor introduce me, or even just saying I work with so-and-so, goes a long way.
There's a certain respect there.
Exactly.
Makes you legitimate.
Yeah, exactly.
But you don't really have the opportunity to compare with other fields. But my experience is that most people are very engaging and they're very helpful. And in this field, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just, partial. But it seems as though there's a lot of people in this field that are really, really engaged. Like here, Ben is like really great guy, and he's very giving. And I think most of the doctors and scientists are. Even basic science, who you think is a little stodgy and kind of, how can I say it, just cloudy and confusing and nerdy. But it's part of it. It's a very important part of it.
I think
It's the
what unifies us and what makes HIV such a really interesting field is this very much shared sense of mission. And so whether you're a basic virologist or a basic immunologist or a translational clinical scientist or clinical trialist, or you're a human rights activist or a public policy person, all of us see the commonality of what we do. And that's what breaks down these otherwise difficult, sometimes imposing barriers of introducing yourself to somebody. Because in the end, we all, in a sense, speak the same language, even though we speak different dialects. And that's what's fun about CROI, and it's what's fun about the interactions that we get to have here.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to maybe ask us, or things that you wanted to bring to this, or maybe that you had expectations of offering to this particular panel that were not asked or would like to offer?
Well, there's one piece of advice that I always give residents or mostly residents, individuals applying to fellowships, especially if they know already that they want a research career. That I do think that having the right mentor is probably the most important part of identifying the right fellowship program for you, because mentors open doors, and they're really critical to your success, and a mentor who's invested in you, I think, is absolutely necessary for success.
Well, hard to follow that. I think that that's absolutely right, and I think that taking really taking the time to find the right place. And I was recently advising a resident who's applying for fellowship on her application, and I said, go and look at every institution, figure out who you would want to meet with before you go there, so you can really assess who might be the best mentors at each institution. And plus, it shows that you're really interested in the place. But I would say that would be an additional piece of advice.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time. We've kind of traditionalized this work that we do and getting the young investigators on a panel. Sometimes they're awardees, like at the IS meeting, but we just ask, for help from the CROI, and they usually offer us some really great folks who are like yourselves that can just be a little bit out there, give a little bit of yourself out on the table, say this is how it is, this is how I feel about things, and it's great.
Thanks
Always
for having
appreciate it.
us.
Thank
Thank
you
you for having us.
Yes.
It's great to meet you both.
All right, thanks.